Hello, and welcome to our webinar, Transitioning UK City Centres Towards Sustainability in the Post-Pandemic World. This is the first webinar in a three-part series provided by the Dar Group for the Major Projects Association. My name is Scott Smith, and I'm Head of Sustainability for Dar in the UK. So now let me introduce the speakers for today's event. Karim Elgendy is our lead sustainable architect with Dar UK, an associate fellow with Chatham House, and the founder of Carboon, an advocacy initiative promoting sustainability in cities in the MENA region. Karim is the recipient of the 2013 Global Green Building Entrepreneurship Award by the World Green Building Council and is a chartered member of the Royal Institute of British Architects. Anastasiou is our lead urban planner in Dar's UK Planning and Urban Design Department. She is a project management professional, chartered architect, planner, and urban designer with over 16 years management and leadership experience in the UK, Greece, and the Middle East and Africa. She has also helped deliver and design significant development projects of varying use and scale on behalf of both public and private sector clients. So both of our speakers bring a wealth of knowledge to the topic today, and I'm going to be handing over to Karim. Karim?
So in trying to understand the impact of COVID on UK cities, we looked at existing long-term trends that preceded it, as well as of COVID itself. What did this? We did this in order to understand how the pandemic affected these trends, where they changed, accelerated, or slowed down by the pandemic, for example. And after this, we focused on how do we use this unique moment as an opportunity to further integrate sustainability into UK city centres, and also to put forward ideas on how to do so. So in terms of our presentation structure, we'll briefly cover a background on UK cities and a description of the long-term trends. We'll be talking about the impact of COVID-19 in a comparative context to other pandemics preceding it. And finally, we'll be presenting a preliminary roadmap for transforming UK city sustainability post-COVID-19. So first, let me introduce UK city centre. The UK urban form is composed of 64 primary urban areas. There's one mega city, London, and the greater southeast. Metropolitan areas, Birmingham, Leeds, Liverpool, Manchester, Newcastle, and Sheffield. And there are 57 towns and cities with a population of more than 125,000. All of these have what we describe as a city centre or town centre that dominated mostly by commercial activities, like retail. And overall, a quarter of all commercial space in the UK is retail, while about half, 50%, is offices. This figure is obviously not uniform across the cities and towns. As the economy of a city gets stronger, it attracts more exporting businesses or businesses that trade beyond their city or local area, and also attracts more commercial offices alongside that. So cities with stronger economies, more exporting businesses, have a bigger share of commercial offices, smaller share of retail. Cities with a weaker economy, on the other side, we see the opposite. We have a higher share of retail on the side. Cities like London and Bristol, which have a relatively large, highly skilled business service sector, only 18% space is retail, 63% is offices. City centres with fewer highly skilled jobs and less exporting businesses like Sunderland or Portsmouth, we find the opposite. So 42% of commercial spaces is retail, and just 24% is offices. Having said that, the high streets and other retail spaces are likely to do better commercially in stronger cities with exporting businesses, higher disposable income that creates in these particular areas. While weaker economies, cities with fewer export and fewer commercial offices, yes, they have higher percentages of retail, but the retail becomes weak and vacant shops. And before COVID, the proportion of high street space that was vacant across England and Wales, including retail, leisure, and food and beverage, was between 10 and 12 of all retail units, just as the baseline. But UK city centres have been undergoing a transformation over the past few decades in response to long-term national trend. Okay, so some of these trends I was referring to were related to national demographic changes like population and thinking of average UK households Well, some of these were relating to the shifting demand in housing, which shifted slightly towards smaller units, and also increasing the need for accessibility and inclusion in commercial spaces, as well as public realm, of course. There are also the urban demographic changes, such as the return of populations to city centers since the 1990s, in what is normally referred to in terminology as the urban renaissance, and the growth of centers thanks to the highly skilled young force moving into the city. They haven't quite returned to the city because they're never there in the first place. And as a result, we have seen a doubling of population in some city centers, Liverpool, Birmingham, Leeds, Manchester, compared to just 10% growth in population nationally over the same period of time. And today, these highly skilled professionals represent more than half of the city center residents. Another trend that we are seeing is the shaping of UK cities. That is also is the unequal impact that we are seeing as a result of the UK legal commitment to 100% decarbonization. Some cities will adopt it differently. Cities will adopt it differently, naturally, as a national commitment by the UK. The UK is also committed to an interim target of more than 2/3 reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by the end of the decade. Both of these are compared to 0% in 1990, just as a baseline, and 44% just before the pandemic, which is the latest estimate we have. And cities and the built environment will play a major role in this, but as I say, it will be an unequal one to meet these commitments. But some cities are already making efforts and making their own plans. London, for example, is committed to carbon neutrality by mid-century, alongside a host of other very ambitious environmental targets. And buildings are, unsurprisingly, at the heart of this. London has joined tens of other global cities, signing up to ensuring that all buildings are zero carbon, all new buildings are zero carbon by 2030. That's in 9 years' time. And that all buildings, new and existing, will meet that target by 2050. The building industry globally and in the UK are also promoting these goals alongside the same line. To reach net zero operational carbon for all new buildings by 2030, and also to do the same for all buildings by 2050. The UK, especially the UK GBC, is also pushing for quantifying and reducing embodied carbon in new buildings. The other trend is increasing awareness, and awareness is quite important. As we have seen in recent years, there's a growing awareness of the impacts of climate change in the UK. According to a survey by UNDP and the University of Oxford, 81% of the UK population believe that climate change is a global emergency, and this is the highest ratio of all the countries surveyed. And of course, housing shortages is another slow, ongoing trend, and also a challenge, especially in the southeast of England. There's ongoing pressure to accelerate the delivery of new homes across the UK, and there's also ongoing demands to reform the planning process, which is seen as a major bottleneck to reduce the stringency of the planning process and to open up parts of the green belt for development. The recent changes to the planning system that we've seen just recently with government changes were attempts to respond to this challenge. It includes the expansion of permitted development rights, which allows some developers to convert some commercial buildings into residential with relative ease. But in post-Brexit UK, with falling net migration, pressure on housing is expected to be relieved just a little compared to the last 2 decades. Another slow trend is the gradual increase of home working. In the 2 decades before COVID-19, the share of jobs worked mainly from home has increased by 80%, albeit from a very low bar, so increased from 3% to 5.3% of the UK workforce. But this figure rises considerably when we consider workers who occasionally work from home. So well before COVID, in 2019, the ONS has reported that 12% of workers worked from home at some point in the week before they were surveyed. And commercial trends in the city centers are also obvious to us over the last decades. This includes the slow demise of brick and mortar retail. That includes high street retail, shopping malls, and retail parks, mostly in favor of online shopping. With 1/5 of all sales happening online, the UK actually leads Europe on e-commerce well before COVID. That obviously has changed since then and has grown even further. And this growth normally comes at the expense of the high street. And as a result, some cities are experiencing growing surpluses of retail space that are unnecessarily boarded up due to that poor demand. And this is particularly the case with cities with more local rather than exporting businesses, as I've described earlier. So in areas where people still want to live due to proximity to workplaces, the demise of retail has led to some transformation, still commercial, but these have changed from retail perhaps into restaurants and cafes. In areas with there are fewer working age residents, the high street is dying out completely. Another social trend that has also been observed in recent decades is the weakness of urban communities. A survey has shown a general feeling that the UK cities are experiencing a weakening sense of community. 2/3 reported quote unquote tangible but weak sense of community. In recent years, we've also seen emerging trends that did not quite fully materialize before COVID. These include increased interest in health, wellness, and work-life balance. The building industry has obviously responded to this by focusing on the role of buildings and supporting human health and well-being. There's also an increased interest in walkability and bikeability, including the improvement of urban equality and also the electrification of mobility with the benefits to air quality that brings. And alongside this, we've also seen an re-emergence, I should say, of urban trends such as localization of services. Known these days in urban circles as the 15-minute cities, but it's a fairly old idea. Other trends are tech innovation and the adoption of smart city technologies and urban application. Again, still quite early days, but they're all expected to get better with the advent of 5G telecommunication. And some of these technologies have supported the emergence of platforms that are good for sustainability. They improve urban resource efficiency using apps such as sharing economy apps. Automation of mobility, including autonomous vehicles, autonomous freight, are also on track for implementation, especially in the UK, and are also expected to have long-term effects on city centres. I've written an article on this, which I may be able to share via the chat afterwards on the impact of automation on London specifically. So with this background in mind regarding these slow urban trends, I must note that major societal and urban changes often happen during or following major events. So wars, pandemics, natural disasters often inspire a movement to build back better, which often leads to observable changes in cities. So the significance of the moments that we are living through should not be underestimated vis-a-vis the development of UK cities. And to discuss the impacts of pandemics on cities generally and the impacts of COVID-19 specifically in the context of all of these trends, I will pass on to my colleague, Anastasiou, to discuss in detail. Anna, over to you.
Thank you, Karim, and thank you for everyone joining our webinar. Pandemics and diseases such as COVID-19 are not new. There have been a number of pandemics in recent history and much more epidemics. The list of recent pandemics includes, for example, the multiple cholera pandemics during the 19th century, the Russian flu, also known as Asiatic flu, in 1889, in 1890, the Spanish flu in 1918, 1920, and of course COVID-19, which started in 2019, and it's not known its end date. What history has shown us is that pandemics has acted as catalyst of change and forced us to reconsider design, planning, and management of our cities. For example, during the outbreak of yellow fever in Philadelphia in 1793, it prompted administrators to take over the task of cleaning streets, cleaning gutters, and collecting rubbish. During the Spanish flu in 1918, 1920, the authorities sought to minimize the social interaction in order to prevent the pandemic spread. Public events were cancelled, civic buildings and facilities and shops were closed, funerals were banned, and public transport use was limited. Spitting was banned, and the wearing of masks was promoted. During cholera in 19th century, as well in Paris, new streets were opened to transform areas that lack air and light and making them more healthy and allow sunlight to reach everywhere. French authorities tore down thousands of buildings, built tree-lined boulevards and parks, and erected fountains and installed an elaborate sewage system. At the same time, in US, Chicago and Washington, the new plans aim to bring fresh air and light into the dense urban fabric. At the same time, the long boulevards, it was a convenient way to eliminate dilapidated housing, facilitate surveillance, and deploy the military quickly to all corners of the city. In Europe, in London specifically, the misconception that the odor coming from wastewater was responsible for the cholera, it prompted one of the world's most ground sewage systems in terms of planning, in terms of the development of wider, straighter, and paved roads. The muddy shorelines of the Thames were narrowed and replaced with embankments and riverside roads and gardens. Generally, pandemics are urban phenomena. What happens is this virus touches down in global cities, which are the most connected to cities elsewhere. Those global airports as most important nodes of virus transmission. From these nodes, the virus spreads through the cities via transit system, public spaces, workplaces, dense housing, where people live in buildings with shared facilities and where it's not possible for people to isolate efficiently and effectively. It has been also noted that climate change is also expected to make pandemics more likely. As the planet heats up and ecosystems shift away from the equator and towards the poles, means that the animals are coming into contact with other animals and humans, and what previously they wouldn't. Another situation that forces unpleasant contacts is, for example, the deforestation and the other forms of habitat loss that forces animals to migrate and potentially contact other animals and humans. Overall, COVID-19 brought a number of changes to the UK cities and specifically to city centres. One of them, for example, it altered demographics in different ways. Thank you, Karim. Firstly, birth rates dropped. Secondly, it made city residents to reconsider living in the city centres. According to surveys, more than a quarter of the population plan to move away from central urban areas within the next years. For example, in London is already experiencing a drop of population. In particular, 5% of Londoners indicate that they would definitely move out of the city within the next year. Population moving out from the city centres will lead to suburbanization, creating the donut effect, possibly. The good news are that demand for city centre services is likely to remain, as people are social species and still want access to all the riches that city centre offers, albeit less frequently because of the conditions we are currently experiencing. The pandemic has increased interest in local services. Place Allianz Homes and COVID report in late 2020 suggested that the presence of local facilities such as shop and services within easy reach for the homes were the most desirable. The good news is that 3/4 of the people felt that this local neighborhood met their everyday needs. Satisfaction peaked where these services were located within 5 minutes reach, but unfortunately satisfaction dropped when these centers were reached within 10 away or more. COVID-19 also led to significant work from home shift. It has observed that 50% of the population, of the people worked from home at the peak of the pandemic. This figure recently, in April 2021, dropped down to 25%, but it still remains double from what it was in 2019. Interestingly to mention, for example, half of the people working from home in London worked from home at some point in 2020. And the highest population of those people are based in affluent areas, suburbs. In general, as a result of experience home working, a study 2020 conducted by that 2/3 of the UK workforce would prefer a hybrid work model Half of this percentage of population prefer to work from home 1 to 2 days, and half of it prefer to work from home 3 to 4 days. In addition, according to a survey run by the Institute of Directors, it looks like that 3/4 of businesses will keep increased home working even after coronavirus has been suppressed. COVID-19 has accelerated the trend seeing the role of home as a center of life. The increase in time spent at home, such as change the functions that homes need to provide, such as spaces for working and leisure areas, flexible areas and spaces to outdoor and access to outdoor space for physical and mental health have proven to be in high demand. GLL survey highlights the desire for personal outdoor space from 36% pre-pandemic to 72%, and private workspace raised from 13% pre-pandemic to 72% after pandemic or during pandemic. 60% of the people are considering making updates to their home, including adding an office or a gym. Working, more than 60% of UK surveyors already indicated a shift in office space from urban areas to suburban locations. And according to a study by RRCS, about 50% indicate that the footprint of the office will be reduced by 10% over the next 2 years. Even though the demand for offices is shrinking, it is envisioned that offices will still remain valuable hubs of ideas exchange and collaboration. Hot desking and flexibility is likely to become increasingly important. For example, weekly meetings could be held in cafe or rented spaces. Companies might bring staff to gather away from offices, away from the city centers, as a retreat, which could be nice and cheaper than long-term rental of downtown premises. The decrease of office demand will drop the rental prices, of course. That could present opportunity to the businesses and entrepreneurs previously based away from city centers to consider setting up offices within these areas and providing spaces and places geared towards meetings and client entertainment needs. And finally, as there is no high demand, central business districts may not remain dedicated to offices as it's been happening. Some might be converted to other uses, such as houses, hotels, mixed uses, or other suitable adaptive reuses. It is envisioned, in conclusion, that working from home will blur the 20th century divide between residential and office districts. It looks like it will be multi-family, multi-use buildings in mixed-use neighborhoods where all life is close to hand, spaces are used non-stop and are adaptable to people's needs. COVID-19 impacted and downsized retail. The UK has experienced relatively high, but not unprecedented, vacancy rates, especially in the north. In December, the vacancy rate in retail was 13%, with 44,000 retail units standing empty, according to the local data company. But in some towns, especially in north of England and parts of Scotland, it's almost double. Shopping centres are almost twice those of retail parks. GLL estimates that the figure will nearly double in the next few years, leaving 80,000 redundant shops littering the UK streets. The result of retail downsizing is that some cities are converting empty department stores into flats, and others are filling vacant shops and community pop-ups and urban farms. This change is not straightforward, as returns from commercial and residential are often less than those from retail, not to mention the high cost and the lost revenue during conversion. In addition, we want vibrant streets and centres, so housing is not always the most appropriate solution. An interesting conversion, for example, also is a Stockton town plans to demolish half of the high street and replace it with a park. It is also envisioned that retail shops may become showrooms and mini warehouses, and shop fronts in prestigious locations like London's Oxford Street could be rented out short-term to temporary uses, like, for example, retail launching new collections. Good news is that pandemic has increased the interest in outdoor space provision, such as private gardens, communal gardens, balconies, and open spaces in central urban areas. In fact, the GLL survey showed 68% of people, up from 31 pre-pandemic, say that proximity to public open space is now very important. Place Alliance report survey in late October 2020 shows that proximity to a park or green space within a 5-minute walk was the strongest predictor of satisfaction, though the satisfaction dropped when open spaces were over 10 minutes away. Another effect of COVID-19 is that public transportation ridership has declined. Proximity to public transport has become less important due to the reduction of the number of trips and, of course, health and safety issues. According to a recent survey conducted in 2021 by London First, 22% viewed proximity to public transport as very important in comparison, interestingly, to 47% pre-pandemic. As we can see, public transportation is already picking up, but not to the same extent as pre-pandemic due to the reduced demand created by redistribution as well as home working. COVID-19 has impacted heavily and probably damaged culture, leisure, and tourism sectors. Research by the Local Government Association shows that the impact of COVID-19 on culture, leisure, tourism, and sport has been severe and is likely to remain challenging. Nevertheless, this sector has a vital role to play to the nation's recovery. Investment on culture and leisure sector is not to be seen as a sunk cost. It's an investment in the health and well-being of a place, and most importantly, to its residents. Also, rural areas seem to exhibit a significant stronger sense of community during the COVID-19 time. Residents strongly value a community spirit and nice neighbors, and during lockdown, this partly expressed itself in the emergence of local online social networks. Finally, and in summary, we could say that COVID-19 promoted or showed promoted more the suburbanization trends, but it is envisioned that the demand of city center services is still likely to remain as people would like to stay and be sociable within the cities. Provision of spaces for home working and indoor leisure seem to be very important to people, and highlighted that people want shops and services to be within easy reach from home. For proximity to public transport became less important than it was pre-COVID, and also highlight that people want to be able to access easily open spaces, sports, culture, and leisure facilities. It is very important for their physical and mental well-being. Smart and suitable adaptive reuse of unwanted spaces trend has been accelerated during the post-COVID era that we live at the moment. All of the above actually hint to the need to provide neighborhoods where all life is close to hand, and spaces are used non-stop and are adaptable to people's needs. Which leads us to the next section of our presentation, and I will pass you back to Karim to describe further. Thank you.
Before we discuss the positive roadmap moving forward, we, as the team, will recognize the negative COVID impacts. COVID presents us with many public health and economic challenges. But just as it provides us with an opportunity to reevaluate some of the aspects of our economy and our society, it also presents us an opportunity to reshape our cities. And this is part of the direct urban and environmental impacts of COVID, and partly due to the impacts of the impacts that the pandemic has had on societal views regarding cities. So the first part of this roadmap is about the urbanism of UK cities. and specifically the city centers. The COVID crisis has inadvertently supported and decentralization agenda versus the hub and spoke model of a strong city center and a surrounding suburbs, less dense suburbs. It did by supporting some local businesses and also curbing the role of specialized non-essential retail. COVID's dramatic impacts on commercial offices, the fact that many of us, and also the impacts on high street retail in city centers is also likely to reduce the commercial domination of city centers, while potentially residential within them, as we've outlined earlier. And these two impacts, if you consider them together, create an opportunity to support this new sustainability agenda of localization, commonly as the 15-minute cities, and to use the city centers, these local centers, outside of the city center itself in order to do so. These local centers could become local mixed-use hubs. They could incorporate small-scale commercial offices, retail, culture, leisure, tourism, new commercial models like the co-working spaces and innovation hubs. And this expected redistribution of population outward from the city that we're currently, according to the surveys, can be steered towards these local mixed-use hubs to, on the one side, delimit or limit that process of densification, and also mitigate the risks of suburbanization. So it's a recognition of that change. Centers, but it's an attempt to mitigate it to a certain extent. Those hubs could also be connected to public transportation, and as a result, they will provide more flexible who are fleeing the city, perhaps not wanting to lose touch with it altogether. Commercial and retail buildings will also be facing pressures to be retrofitted to residential use. Residential is less profitable, which will enable more mixed-use city centers to develop, as Anna has outlined. But the quality of these converted residential units will need to be ensured because there's currently concerns about conversion of high street shops into. Mobility also plays a major role in this roadmap. COVID has led to a reduction in mobility in general, which reduced private vehicle use, reduced demand for public, caused a relative slight increase in active mobility. So this, together with the redistribution away from the city center caused by localization, all support a transformation of the city centers themselves into spaces that can encourage active mobility. And that requires us to improve active mobility infrastructure. City centers, expanding the scope of cycling lanes also requires further electrification of mobility in order to improve air pollution, reduce air pollution rather. And even the introduction of urban autonomous vehicle zones, as we are expecting according to the timeline for these. The local hubs that we're proposing can, in a way, reduces vehicle use, increase accessibility to public transportation, depending on where we set them up, and also improve what. And finally, buildings too have a role to play in this roadmap for a more sustainable future for city centers. More homes will need to be retrofitted and adaptable. We don't want that to happen again, where we'll end up with buildings that we're unable to use, but also to provide more capacity, more homes with gardens, big and gardens and houses with access to open spaces will be built, and we're expecting demand to result in provisions that meet that demand. And commercial will also face pressure to be retrofitted into residential. So on the upside, all this retrofitting might relieve some pressure on the housing and create a new long-term equilibrium for housing demand. But more importantly, it's also an opportunity for integrating our net zero carbon targets, for example, and some of the circular economy principles that we're advocating. And all of these, it's an opportunity to integrate flexibility into these buildings, as well as new buildings, of course, to future-proof them against further pandemic changes in demand. So new buildings in a post-COVID world need a new approach. They need to integrate more flexibility for future changes of use. They need to accommodate, to better consider wellness, and they need to have a higher ambition for decarbonization, including operational net carbon and also embodied carbon, such as using timber as a method of doing so. And all of these opportunities could line up with existing efforts for green recovery for the UK national, and they can also align with efforts outlined in city plans like the London Plan or the Liverpool Economic Recovery Plan. And naturally, each city needs its own approach, but if some of these approaches implemented successfully in some cities, it can also be adapted and replicated to a certain extent elsewhere. Once again, thank you for your time, and we look forward to responding to your questions and comments.
Thank you, Karim.
I'll hand it back to Scott. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's one question that is there a list of UK cities and evidence supporting the recent trends that was built from your research? And can that be made available? The list of UK cities that the evidence supporting the recent trends was built from.
Yes, we are. This publication is part of ongoing research that we are about to finish, Anna and myself, and we'll be publishing it with full citation when that report comes out, and it will be made public.
Okay, brilliant. I guess we can send that to everybody who's attended the seminar or this webinar afterwards.
Yeah. Once it's published, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. A question that I've had is, what, in your opinion, are the core services that need to be provided in the local urban neighborhood to meet the transition vision? So are there, like, obviously, if you have a small, local urban neighborhood, what things need to be there? Is it retail? Is it, is it restaurants? Is it IT, schools? So, do you have an opinion?
To the urban designer. I will defer to the urban designer on this one.
Anna, do you have a?
I think we cannot approaching with a rule of thumb what's the most suitable. I think every neighborhood, every town, every city is unique. It has already existing provisions that we have to work with them. But generally, what is required and our lessons learned is we need to have what is required for people to live life in close to be able to go close to the facilities that they need. So going back, for example, to the 15 minutes neighborhood cities or the compact cities is everything that is required to service us. If that means offices, yes, that means offices. We only need to commute to our offices within 15 minutes. That makes things pleasant. Maybe facilities such as mentioned earlier, like leisure facilities and specialized facilities and services, they could be located within big city centers. But within neighborhoods, everything that we need to have in close to hand to make our living more pleasant, and we will not need to commute more than 15 minutes.
Okay. Do you think that, this trend now from home working and being part of, not being office focused will create an IT kind of social divide for the people that have, easy available IT and secure internet services to those that don't have that luxury? Will this need to be addressed in some way?
You're talking about the digital divide, right?
Yes, yeah, digital divide.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. That is an ongoing concern. Those who had the highest satisfaction were the ones who had great internet, apparently, amongst those who work from home. That was I think the primary predictor of satisfaction with working from home. And some jobs cannot be worked from home as a result of the lack of that basic service. So absolutely, it will need to be addressed.
So obviously, a major investment in IT infrastructure and stuff more than we already have would probably be a priority in a transitional vision. Okay.
To also add to what Karim mentioned earlier, again, according to the surveys, together with the people wanting more open space and more flexible spaces, it is included the need of fast broadband. It is within the must-do list and must-want list.
Okay. Is there any other trends or pressures that may help in meeting the UK's net zero carbon targets, as opposed to the pandemic and Brexit? Obviously there's climate change. is there a kind of a government role in all of this?
The government will do all the non-city things. Central government will do all the. So, for example, the grid component of it. I think that's primarily led by big players, and the government is playing a major role in that. In terms of regulations, that could have an influence on cities, of course, in terms of improving energy efficiency requirements as a result, putting new guidelines on retrofitting, which could see an uptick according to our estimates. So there is a role, I think, both in terms of setting mandates as well as forcing regulations.
Okay. What kind of timeline would you put on the transition process, and what are the main obstacles to that timeline?
Anna, would you like to have a go at this?
From post-COVID area of adjusting ourselves to the new trends, I think it feels like things will happen quite fast. First, because there is quite a lot of overlap of the solutions with the sustainability agenda and all the plans, and it seems that a lot of cities plans are focused on the sustainability, and there is a kind of integration of what is happening between the lessons from COVID, which highlight the importance to go faster on some of the solutions that we were looking for decades now within sustainability. So I think I cannot put a time frame, but things will move much faster than it was happening before COVID. I think COVID highlighted that the things should go faster than it was going.
There are elements to the timeline. I think there's the timeline of things that are happening already, which we have no control over, and there's the timeline for our proposals, and our proposals will need to tie in with bigger commitments, such as the mid-century commitments, for example, for decarbonization, which I think is what many of the sustainability agenda components are heading towards.
Okay, thank you. Another question is, are there elements that are specific to British as opposed to cities in continental Europe or elsewhere? And what can we learn from urban experience in other countries and cultures?
Good question. UK cities have similar characteristics to other European cities in terms of density, for example, in terms of transportation integration. All of these are commonalities. UK cities have a better basis for pedestrianization than perhaps some of the other European cities. France, in terms of case studies, is already mandating a 15-minute city plan, and it's the one that is currently, the current mayor is championing this idea, and it's almost become a French idea today, which I don't know if that helps with the UK doing it or not, but it's certainly providing a template for how to integrate pedestrianization, improving public transportation, and localization. And by doing these things, reducing the need to travel for more than 15 minutes to any of the main basic services that one would need on a daily basis. So I think I would look to Paris for this.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Do you have any other examples? Sorry,
yeah.
Anna, do you have any other examples in mind, or any other anything to add?
What I was going to add, I think there are some similarities, as you mentioned, of British cities with other cities, but the existing conditions and the trends that that were happening within our cities make at the same time the British cities a little bit different, and also the plans and the focus of economic recovery of the cities is usually different between cities. So we can compare some elements if we are generic, but then they become a little bit specific to the trends that every city is experiencing and what the government is aiming in order to recover with the economy, and where they want to focus, what other focuses are, basically.
Okay. If this transition comes to fruition and stuff, would there be any major disruptors, that could turn this one on its head? obviously we've got COVID, we've got Brexit, we've got the other economic impacts that have kind of taken us from an office-centric urban environment to a more dispersed neighborhood environment that we would like to see. But would there be anything that could actually draw us back to a more office-centric vision, to go back where we were pre-COVID, pre-Brexit? Or is that too much speculation?
I don't envisage that happening. I think we've already crossed that point.
So we've crossed the Rubicon. We've actually gone past, and so we have to have a new vision of urban spaces.
There's a new equilibrium happening. People are asking to work from home more, and employees reluctantly have given them the opportunity to work from home more. And so that's set in place. I think I don't envisage us going back to 100% working, not 100%. The estimate was 95% working from offices for all employees, or working from a workplace. So I didn't envisage that. Whereas going back to that figure, we might go to something slightly less than that. Not necessarily the peak of the crisis, but something less than that.
So do you if then everything is more dispersed, we have 15-minute cities, will obviously transport needs to adapt to that. People won't be commuting. People won't need the car in every dwelling. There's a more, it would be more of a communal transition as far as that. Would also, transport for goods and services need to be more centralized and distributed? Should we have a rethink about the transport models throughout cities?
Yes, it would have to definitely be revised. It is envisioned that, for example, now more logistics areas will be needed just for the purpose of the chains and on the retail, how the retail will be used and will be shown. There would be, probably even the plans. What's happening now with TfL, it changed completely the whole equilibrium and balance and how it was operating, and people now, for example, they're not commuting as much as possible. So we will have to focus our transport plans in a different way, definitely.
Can I add to this? I think also the hubs that we're proposing should be around transportation nodes as well, both outside of the city and also within the city itself. So London, for example, the city of multiple villages, if you like, already has these nodes built in around high-speed, high-volume nodes like tube stations, for example, and also we've got the public transportation, the more mobile buses infrastructure as well. So you could design around some of these elements and put your hubs and make sure they're still connected. People still want to have mobility and move from one place to the other, but to a lesser extent. So having the flexibility of not necessarily being in the city center, but moving further away from it, but still having the connection to it, will be critical to the success of it. No one would really want to leave a city center live and go and live in the middle of nowhere with no public transportation connection at all. I think that's it's a bigger jump to make than it is to move slightly outside with the reduced interconnectivity to the city center. And providing that and creating an alternative that has these mixed-use hubs as well as some connectivity, I think that would make or break that proposal that we're putting forward.
Okay. Another question: do you think there needs to be government-led procured initiatives? Examples: housing, internet capacity, coverage, mobile coverage, charging points, etc., to accelerate sustainability, rather than relying on companies to do this in the open market? Yes.
Incentives, carrots and sticks are absolutely necessary to create that steer. And if the government is legally committed to do something, it cannot rely entirely on the public sector to do that. I think that's the easy answer. But Anna, I'm sure, could give that more detail.
I would say that it has to become like a lifestyle, as we consider a hometown, a town center is important to have our services. There should be provisions that are must to be there, and some of them should be like charging stations, green energy generation, etc., etc., etc. So it should become as part of the must-have mandatory list within our hubs.
Okay. I think that's it from me and the questions that I've seen and have. Is there anything you guys who want to add to this as a closing statement?
Other than that, we will be releasing the report soon to capture this and a little bit more, outline our vision for how UK city centres could transform. I think one thing I want to reiterate is the importance of the moment we're living through. The cities change these great moments, then that's a moment that we must capture. And failing to capture it might just lead us to market forces transforming it the way they want to do. Anna, do you have anything to?
I would say that I wouldn't consider negative impacts of COVID-19. I would see what we experience as that we have a lot of lessons to learn, and we should go back to the common urban design sustainable principles that we've been using, because these are very much highlighted through the pandemic. I saw how important it is to put down the things that we've been doing for decades now. And I'm very, in a way, happy that the whole situation showed us that we have to go back to our roots in a way.
Okay, thank you. Well, then I will hand over to Andy Murray, who's the chairman of the Major Projects Association, to close our session.
Great, thank you for the handover, Scott. Although I just point out I'm the executive director. So
sorry, executive director. My apologies.
Which is brilliant. So, well, thank you very much, Anna, Karim, and Scott. It was fascinating to hear about the needs of our future needs of our cities as they transition to a more sustainable future. I was fascinated by the French 15-minute city, and I'm wondering whether we should have UK policy for a 14-minute city. As that strive for competitiveness.
I thought exactly.
Yep. So let's lobby for that one, or maybe even 10 or 9. Anyway, I'd just like to signpost some upcoming events. We've got 2 more of these lunchtime sessions on sustainability from the Dar Group, one around net zero and one looking beyond net zero, factors such as resilience and so on. We've got 2 sessions relating to project sponsors or project sponsorship, whether that's a role or a function. One is one of our seminars looking at a wide range of aspects around the sponsors and sponsorship being possibly the most misunderstood role in major projects, and another one around those who are new to sponsorship, and so what's the development pathway and career pathway for those who want to be project sponsors going forward. We've got a great Cube at Work session coming up around the neuroscience of change, and for those of you who haven't participated in a Cube at Work session in the past, it's well, I describe it as sort of Minecraft-like, but it's a second life environment where you interact with others' avatars as a means to having conversations and interaction. It's very, very productive. So please do join us for that. And then we've got our full-day, one-day simulator in June as part of our professional development activities as well. So quite a packed session coming up through June. One last thing I'd like to do is just to remind you of the feedback we'd like to have for these sessions. We're always looking to improve them, and hopefully in a moment a Menti code will come up that you can complete and provide us a bit of feedback. We've got that. Here we go. Yes. Here we go. So it is 60 34 86 5. So if you could please just pop into that. There's not too many questions. It won't take you long to answer those. So once again, thank you to Anna, Karim and Scott. Look forward to the next 2 sessions in this series, and thank you to everyone that's attended this lunchtime.
Thank you.
Thank you.